Watch the ride.
Hey everybody, hope you're all doing alright out there. Firstly, forgive the helmet, it's so windy today, this is the only way I'm going to get decent audio for you. So, when I do motorcycle reviews and things, sometimes I might say something like, the steering feels raked out and it has a dead ahead feel. And I've said things like that for a long time and then realised maybe some people don't know what that means. Now the thing that affects how that feels is the rake of the bike. So in this video, in very basic terms, I'm going to explain what the rake and trail on a motorcycle is, how it affects bikes, and what sort of bikes have what and why they have them. As simply as possible. This is a subject you could get into great depth on. That's not what this one's about. So let's start at the beginning. What is the rake angle and where is it measured between? So you take a line, imaginary line, down the tube on the frame, so you know where it pivots. Take an imaginary line down there, which on this bike is actually very close to the forks, but we'll get onto that in a minute because that's called offset. So you've got a line going down the headstock tube through the middle, and then you've got a line going down vertically through the front axle. The angle between here and here is your rake angle, and then the distance down there between the contact patch of the tyre and the line in front, which is set by the angle of the steering, gives you your trail. On this bike, the forks are very, very close to being in line with the actual tube on the frame, and that's because it's got a very small offset. On some bikes, that will be here, and the actual forks will be much further forward, and there will be a much bigger distance between the two, and again, that's the offset measurement. But on this bike, it's virtually nothing. This stick is not really in the right place currently, but I'm just explaining. So, if you can imagine that the forks were more out this way, so there was a bigger angle here, you can imagine that this would be further out here, so this patch would be a lot longer. Now, as I say, this is called the trail. Trail, the more of it you have, the more that the wheel wants to stay dead ahead, as in, you know, it feels like it wants to stay straight. And also, when you go into a corner, you're going to have to actually push the bike into the corner. You're going to have to do a lot more steering force to get that wheel to turn to make it go around the corner. But what that does give you is stability and feel and control. And the far extreme version of this would basically be a chopper, where, you know, the wheels are all the way out there, so much so that you can actually feel it wanting to flop left and right. But when you're going, it stays up. But equally, it's going to have an absolutely massive turning radius because there's a very long distance between the rear wheel and the front wheel, as in the wheelbase, because raking the bike out will increase the wheelbase length. But also, because the wheel isn't pivoting as much, it has to do a wider turn. The obverse to that is actually very much like this, a supermoto. This has got a very narrow angle of rake, which means that the steering is very, very light and it likes to pivot easily. And that means it will turn into corners very easily. But when you're in the corner, you're not going to have as much feel from the tyres. It's not going to be as stable. So if this green one is your vertical going through the axle, and this one is our rake angle on, say, a chopper, it's going to be something like that, you know, way out there with a huge amount of trail. If you bring it closer in, something like this, it's getting more like this sort of bike, but then we don't have as much trail. And as I say, we don't have as much feel, we don't have as much stability there, but you can turn very tightly. As we mentioned, the vertical that goes straight down is the contact through your axle, is basically the contact patch of the tyre. But the point that the wheel actually steers is like an imaginary point in space in front of the wheel, and that is, as we say, what the trail is. So if you have a very long trail, when you're turning, you're not turning the wheel over that much, so you're not necessarily getting that close to the edge of the tyre. If you have a very narrow rake, when you turn in, you bring the contact patch when you're in the corner much closer to the edge. Now obviously this gets changed by the types of tyres you've got, the sizes of that, and you know, blah blah blah, but no, that also affects it. That's also one of the reasons why, you know, a cruiser feels so comfortable and stable and sturdy going through a nice sweeping corner. You know, it just feels great, and it's like it's on rails. Whereas in something like this, it's much more jittery and sort of all over the place. Now, you may or may not know this. If you want an aircraft to be agile, you need it to be as close to out of control as possible, because it means it will flip one way or the other without much force. And that's kind of what people want to do with their steering, to make it very, very quick, to turn in quickly on a bike. But in doing that, you get yourself in a situation where, you know, tank slappers can happen. Tank slappers are where the steering's jumping left to right, left to right, left to right. And part of that is down to the fact that your rake angle is so up there. And for that reason, if you have a bike that's got a very narrow rake angle, you might want to put a steering damper on it because it gives you back some of that control. So in that case, you get the maneuverability of having a small rake angle, but with the feel of a larger rake angle. That's why dampers are good. This bike probably would be quite cool with a damper on it. I don't really feel like I need it. So from the factory, your rake angle is set. However, people sometimes want to do things to their bikes to make them a little bit lower, but they may not realise the implications of doing it. Some people would like to loosen off their yokes and lower it down the fork a little bit so you have a bit more fork sticking out the top. What that will naturally do is bring the front wheel in and bring the bike down. But obviously you've just said brought the front wheel in, that's increasing the rake angle. If you go too far with that, you're going to be in a position where your rake angle is so narrow it could make the bike very unstable or very quick to overreact on the front end. Now the way you counteract that is you lower the rear, because if you raise the rear, if you think about it, you're now increasing the angle. So you want the bike to be flat and you need it to be balanced between the front and the rear. You can't just lower the front. Well, you can if you want that effect. Some people do it just to increase the speed of their steering. You know, it's all dependent. But as I say, the people who want to lower their bikes to make them more accessible to them if they're a little bit shorter, you can't just lower the front and think it will all be good. You do need to make sure you balance that with lowering the rear as well, to my understanding. So to recap very quickly, the rake angle is the angle of an imaginary line through the tube of the frame, not the forks, going down, and then a vertical, and then you've got your rake angle between here and here. This will give you your trail, more control, harder to steer, more dead ahead feel, less angle, easier to steer, less stable. This is a very basic explanation of a quite complex subject, which there are lots and lots of implications as to, you know, if you change this, something else can change, and you need to know about that. Don't watch this and go, right, I know what to do. I'll just go and do this to my bike now, because you could make it very dangerous for you to ride. I highly recommend not doing any work like that yourself. Leave that to someone with some experience, or at least make sure you know what you're doing before you do that. And that normally means speaking to someone who does know what they're talking about. Because in doing some sort of fact-checking research for myself for this video, I found so many contradictory things from people where they've not quite understood things, like the fact that you don't take the angle through the forks, you take it through the steering tube. And then the distance between that steering tube and the fork is your offset. And if you change the offset, it will change the angle of the forks. There you go. If you found this video interesting or useful, hit that like button. I'd appreciate it. I have lots of other videos like this explaining basics, even from getting a license, riding a bike, fixing them. I have a whole build series on this bike and another one. Check out the channel. And if you enjoy watching my videos regularly, please consider supporting this channel through Patreon. Links in the description. Lots of benefits to that, including being in Discord. And you can chat with me or shoot me on Call of Duty or whatever. Anyway, till the next one. Bye-bye.